Need it because we've got the heat on the phone right now. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the Majority Report executive producer emeritus and now the political director for Progressives United, Josh Orton. Welcome to the program, Josh.
Hey, Sam. How are you?
I'm doing great. Now, Progressives United was established by Russ Feingold, I guess, 2 or 3 years ago now, in response to Citizens United. It's the 4th anniversary of Citizens United. We haven't made much headway, have we?
Well, it's interesting. One of the biggest problems with money in politics is not just when Republicans take corporate money and forward corporate policies. You know, I think the biggest danger with money in politics is when Democrats go down the same road. And then you get an experience like we had in the 1990s, the last time Democrats were cool with unlimited corporate contributions then to the parties. You know, that was the era where we saw Glass-Steagall repealed by a vote of 90-8 in the Senate. You know, you saw the 1996 Telecom Act. You know, you saw all sorts of deregulation because the Democratic Party, thanks to Terry McAuliffe and others, found this loophole, and the party was taking 6-7-figure checks from corporations like FedEx while they were considering legislation. And so, since Citizens United in the last 3 years, I think one of the biggest problems we've seen is that Democrats have eagerly and happily embraced this new system of soft money, of unlimited corporate contributions to these, you know, to these 501c4s and these super PACs, which makes it, you know, much harder to make headway on reform.
Yeah, all right. That's a great point, and I want to work our way back around there. But I want to start with one aspect of it. You know, one of the aspects of the rulings in Citizens United that always sort of, I mean, that still sticks in my craw. Justice Kennedy was arguably the sort of the linchpin of this, and there were all sorts of claims that were made at the time about, well, this doesn't really even, the idea of corporations giving this type of money doesn't corrupt the political process, doesn't even give the perception of corruption. And there was also this assumption by Justice Kennedy that, look, this is all going to be transparent, right? That if corporations give money to a politician, their shareholders will see it, and they'll make the determination as to whether or not this is a valid use of corporate funds. But none of that really materialized, did it?
No, and, you know, I think that the court that decided Citizens United was just, you know, naive at best and sort of negligent or intentionally dumb about the political process at worst. And, you know, you saw when McCain-Feingold was deemed constitutional back in 2003, the Supreme Court then analyzed a lot of testimony. They made findings. They had a body of evidence about how money had flowed and how that had led to corruption or the appearance of corruption. And this Supreme Court, in deciding Citizens United, didn't do any of that. And you know, this assumption that it was going to work in the most idealistic way that the justices could imagine, they're just completely out of touch. And you know, whether that's an argument for maybe a non-judge nominee to the Supreme Court, maybe it's time for a legislator justice, or someone from the actual political process who can sort of speak to these issues. But yeah, you're completely right. The Supreme Court looked at this sort of almost as a math problem and assumed that, you know, as long as we have these coordination laws in place which prevent these outside groups from technically speaking with campaigns or candidates for federal office, then everything would be fine. But it doesn't work that way at all. And I think that the question isn't, well, is this money going right to campaigns or to candidates? The question is, are elected officials and candidates relying on that money to exist? And the answer is, without a question, yes. And once they're in office, you see people, when the parties sort of build that unlimited corporate money into their plan for the next election cycle, then of course you're going to start seeing them change, adjust their policies and their politics to make sure that money is still there.
And let me go even further than that, because this is the aspect. It's not just that they are going to assume that they're going to get the money. The potential for corporations to dump, and they do this through dark money groups. They basically launder it through 501c4, I guess, groups.
Yeah.
The potential for these corporations to dump money also inhibits the behavior of officials. So on one hand, they anticipate that the money could be there, so they maybe vote in favor, or they anticipate that the money could be there, and so they vote. So it changes in opposition to them, so it changes their vote. It seems that the psychology here is they completely. There was absolutely no, I guess, contemplation of the psychological effects that would take hold on lawmakers. I think, I interviewed Sheldon Whitehouse a couple of years ago, and he said, all they need to do is just show up in your office and imply that they're going to dump this money into your election for your competitor, and that can change the way you vote. It could actually cause you to go out and seek more money from other sources that would also equally influence your vote. It just creates an arm race in some ways.
Yeah, exactly. And so, the coordination laws that exist are just completely are ridiculous. They're not. They're a joke, right? So, you see, a former chief of staff for someone now running the super PAC supporting their reelection, or family members running these outside groups. There's a million ways around these things. They're not really even enforced. And so, you basically have this, you have to sort of think of it as one ecosystem. And the psychological thing is interesting, not just from the perspective of an elected official, but, you see people when they turn on cable news and really any network, when you hear pundits talking about Citizens United, talking about, how, well, money's going to find a way somehow, how, Democrats really want to change this stuff, ask yourself, are these people who also do political consulting? Because, 9 times out of 10, the consultants in D.C. who talk about Citizens United are making money from Citizens United. They created this whole new ecosystem of, every new outside group that takes huge unlimited contributions is going to need a TV consultant, is going to need in some cases a field consultant, is going to hire a digital strategy firm. It has created a whole new it's a whole sort of consultant employment plan. And so of course they don't want that money to dry up. There's no incentive for them to say that things need to change.
And let's talk a little bit about McCutcheon, because this is a case that is I believe the court has heard some of the oral arguments, and this is a case that's going to be the next sort of, I guess, shoe to drop, or maybe it's this year, I guess. They're going to rule on it this year. This is McCutcheon versus the Federal Elections Commission, and this is basically deals with getting rid of the limits on individuals, on wealthy individuals, in terms of what they can contribute. So it's like a cage match, right? I mean, all rules are thrown out the window.
Well, so there are two types of contribution limits. There's the limits to individual campaigns. So, you can give $2,500 to a federal campaign. And then there's what's called aggregated limits, which is the total amount of money across all federal campaigns that one individual can give within a whole election cycle. And so McCutcheon is a challenge to that aggregate limit. So right now it's, less than $100,000 aggregate limit. So, it's illegal for me to max out to give $2,500 if I was a billionaire to every House race. I couldn't max out to every one. I could only sort of find some combination of donations that would get me to the aggregate limit right now. So McCutcheon would blow that up, and so when we talk about these kinds of limits and this kind of reform, what we're always talking about is corruption. And so yes, these very wealthy individuals can now give to these outside groups. There's a tiny bit of distance between them and the elected officials. But blowing up the aggregate limit means that they can basically be asked for a 7-figure check to spread across all committees. So the new maximum for an aggregate limit is basically the maximum amount for every campaign and committee combined. And so if you're the majority leader or a minority leader in Congress, and you know that there's an individual donor who gave 7 figures to spread across your entire party's committees and campaigns, are you going to pick up the phone and answer that person's call? The answer is probably yes. That, I believe, clearly rises to corruption or the appearance of corruption. But there, the other frustrating thing is on the other side, conservatives and sort of these campaign finance nihilists who think there should be basically no limits at all and that money has a direct correlation to speech, they're very good at arguing this stuff because they don't come at it from an academic legal standpoint. They're activists. They're political activists who campaign hard and are very aggressive. And if there's something that's been missing on the pro-reform side, on sort of the anti-corruption side, it's that kind of aggression. I love Lawrence Lessig and the work he does. I've seen him give speeches. I think he's a wonderful professor. But the kind of activism that we see a lot from the left is more about sort of organizing ourselves around an issue. And I don't think progressives have really been on the attack. The guys who are doing this on the Republican side, who are arguing these cases before the Supreme Court, they're mob lawyers, right? Their job is to make sure their clients can do everything possible within the law, and then actually change the law or stretch the law so they can get away with even more stuff. And they find ways to cover up when they may have broken the law. And I think that kind of saying that directly and actually sort of hitting it on the nose, where it's just this whole movement for corruption on that side, just hasn't been talked about.
Yeah, I want to get back to sort of what we can do to change it, but just on McCutcheon, it seems to me that the other potential sort of corruption that can exist there is not just that the majority leader or whoever, the fundraising chair of the Senate campaign committee will get in touch with this, but money's fungible, right? I mean, so if I can say I'm giving to the Senate campaign chair 2,500 times 50 races, that cash could all just go into one race, right? I mean, once it goes to the committee, it becomes whitewashed. It's fungible. You don't have to spread that out, right? If you're giving it to the committee, is that right?
Well, but there's limits to the committees too. So, in other words, they could give that huge sort of 7-figure ask, and then it would sort of have to be channeled to the individual state parties and then to the individual campaigns themselves.
Okay.
The committees have a limit themselves, so it wouldn't actually be all in one pot necessarily. I mean, there's an argument that some people are going to try and find a way around that. Technically, what you're doing is you're giving a maximum contribution to all 50 state parties, to every congressional and Senate campaign, and to the national committees all at once. And technically, they're supposed to spread it out that way. But what we saw and what we've seen in previous elections, which gets really sketchy, is you'll see these donations spread out to the different state parties, and then the different state parties will contribute to other state parties. So in other words, if you've got a deeply red state like Wyoming, the Republican Party there can then just push all their money into a more competitive state like Colorado.
Interesting. All right. So aside from sort of a rhetorical posture and sort of a conceptual posture in looking at this campaign finance reform is really sort of an anti-corruption movement, what sort of tangible steps need to happen? I mean, what is the game plan here?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is the most sort of short-term, immediate thing that's quite important is making sure that there's a Democratic Senate for the last 2 years of Obama's presidency, in the case that he's going to nominate one or two Supreme Court justices. That's the most concrete and sort of profound thing that would change the makeup of the court for a long time, and the best way to sort of pave the ground to actually overturning Citizens United as law. So maintaining a Democratic Senate is a huge part of it. The second thing is we have to look at the state levels because you see this kind of corruption happening on the state level, and so the second very concrete thing is to fight for both public financing and disclosure laws in states. And I think that it remains to be seen how serious Andrew Cuomo is about passing public financing in New York.
Right.
But that's one issue that needs very serious attention from progressives all over the country, because that provides a sort of a state level model that can be duplicated. And if the states aren't quite yet at public financing, they should at least be pushing disclosure laws like are sort of on tap in California, because the C4s. The use of C4s, their utility is anonymity. And these disclosure laws would pull back the curtain. And so this corporate money would no longer have as many or the most important of these vehicles to sort of buy the election anonymously.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And I was going to say the last thing is, a lot of the regulatory agencies in the administration are in charge of enforcing this stuff and can do a lot more. The FEC is worthless. It should be scrapped and replaced, and the New York Times actually has an editorial about that today. But also, there's been a lot of talk about the SEC instituting disclosure rules for corporations themselves, of having to tell their shareholders, how much money they're spending on political activity and where. And I think that, those administrative agencies need to hear from people to know that they have to serve that way. And it's the same thing with the IRS. And, Republicans have been very savvy about attacking, there's a reason why the IRS scandal, quote unquote scandal, became a huge thing. It wasn't just because they're looking for any way to demonize Barack Obama. It's also because they know that the IRS is one of the agencies that oversees whether or not, the Karl Rove and David Kochs of the world are breaking the law.
Right.
So those are the big three things, that I think progressives need to focus on in the short term. The other thing is Democrats in the Senate have to be serious about passing a disclosure law. They tried in the past. They really need to put their muscle into it. And I think it's also important to hold President Obama accountable for basically dropping the issue. There's a State of the Union coming up, but he needs to make this kind of disclosure a priority, because if he does it in the last 3 years of administration, he's really part of his legacy is going to be that he really allowed this culture of corruption in the Democratic Party to grow.
And make no mistake, the way that a plutonomy becomes a plutocracy, and the way that when you talk about wealth inequality, there's a reason why our government is pursuing, in some respects, policies that continue to enlarge this inequality gap, and that is because they are pursuing policies that are favored by the wealthiest of the wealthiest. And so that's
exactly what this is about. My first poli-sci professor in college, when I was a freshman, the first day he said that politics is about one thing: who decides. And so it's who decides what laws are passed, who decides who pays what in taxes. And so campaign finance reform and money in politics is about who decides. And, by letting this culture of unlimited corrupting money flood in, we're letting the people decide who have a ton of money and who want to mold the government for their own benefit at the expense of the working poor and the underprivileged. It's outrageous.
And let me just say this about, Cuomo. He ran on campaign finance. He is, by what I understand, people have told me in New York, he is paying lip service to it now, but is not doing what needs to be done to get it through. And if it can't happen in New York, where's it going to happen? I mean, if it can't happen in New York State, where he is just this weekend said, conservative extremists have no place here, where there's supposedly some type of so-called liberal ascendancy, where else is it going to happen? I mean, that's why that is, in my estimation, a huge betrayal and hugely indicative of a problem that we have in the Democratic Party. They'll pay some lip service to it, but they will not go to the mat for it, because at the end of the day, they don't have a problem with it.
Right, and I think that also in New York with Cuomo, there's sort of a fool me once thing going on here, right? Because he campaigned on that originally, but once he was in office, he didn't do the things necessary to make it happen. When there were state senate elections, and there were Democrats running who would really make the difference and get him the votes he needed for public financing,
right.
He didn't lift a finger to help them. And so, yes, it's great that he's including it as proposals now, but again, it remains to be seen whether he'll do the work to make it happen.